So you might be saying, well, what does that have to do with the constant threat of death? And the constant threat of death is not always the threat of death of your physical life. Sometimes there's a threat of losing your family. Sometimes there's a threat of losing economic security. Sometimes there's a threat of losing your father to incarceration. And the fact of the matter is that the people who murdered my brother were the only people, third generation, not living in prison. And so the only way that they had to sustain their life was not through the public education system. It was to continue the family business. And they were successful at it. Third generation, selling dope, prostitution, cartelling, guns, and drugs. And so they continued in that. And what do we see currently today is we see children who are beginning kindergarten with PTSD. And how is that being assessed? Well, it's being assessed through something called the ACEs, an ACEs assessment. And we know that in utero, at the very beginning of utero, that when a child hears cuss words and when they hear discontention and discord, they feel the threat in the womb. And so how does that affect us? Well, we see it in the classroom. We see it in kindergarten. We see it in first grade. We see it in adults in our workplace. Some of the people we work with can't even handle it when they're under stress. You know, let their boyfriend or their baby daddy tell them, I'm leaving you. They can't get anything done. And then we expect our children to come inside of a classroom and to be able to perform. So yes, we see the threat of death, but we see it in various forms. And we have to be very real about what our children are going through. And we have to be able to be innovative to meet them at the ground level.
Thank you very much.
And whether or not you live in Denver County or Arapahoe County or Adams County or San Luis, which is the first state in Colorado, which is actually the poorest county, or Montezuma, where only 3% of the kids are reading at grade level, or here in Green Valley Ranch and Montbello, where a greater percentage of the schools are not performing and meeting the needs of our kids of color. I definitely think that income, your zip code specifically, your zip code determines the quality of life that you will have. It determines whether or not you have access to a good school. It determines whether or not you have access to fresh, leafy green vegetables, those that are red or those that are purple. And so when we talk about income really does determine who is standing in front of your kids. Is it a dream snatcher, or is it someone that will sustain the dream of a child?
Thank you very much.
This whole thing kind of reminds me of a quote from the late Dr. Barbara Seisman. And she writes that school reform as we know it now will not work because the main problem of education of African American and Latino children is that as long as school reform measures fail to attack the main pillars of structural racism, African Americans and many others will not be successful. So as long as Black people tolerate the least qualified teachers, the fewest resources, the worst facilities, inadequate supplies and book, and a curriculum that denies the existence of Black people, their heritage, and their history, school reform will fail. And she talks about how we've been walking in circles for decades trying to figure this out, and it's not hard.
So I believe one of the question was around workforce and some of the innovative things that are going on around the state and specifically around the country. And I'd like to draw everyone's attention to Arapahoe County, the Anschutz Medical Campus. The Anschutz Medical Campus is responsible for about 365,000 jobs. Less than 1% of those people who are employed there live in Arapahoe County or live in the zip code of 81011 or 80239, which would be Montbello. About 4 years ago, we did a deep assessment to understand, well, who are the people who are working on Anschutz? And we found out that they weren't residents of House District 42, Denver, or Arapahoe County. We also found out that less than 2% were, 0.5% were people of color. And so the more we dug in, we said, you know what, maybe capitalism isn't that bad. Maybe free enterprise isn't that bad. And maybe there's something to this thing called sector partnerships, where you bring together business, policy, and community. And we sat down with the people at Anschutz and Children's and Aurora Public Schools and Representative Fields, and we said, we think you have a problem here. And the problem is that you haven't created a campus where people can live, work, and play. And specifically, if you're in a community where 192 people, or there's 192 different languages, when people are coming into that ER, when they're going in for inpatient services, when they're going to be educated within the rural public school system, you have a workforce gap. And that gap means that we have a surplus of students of color in rural public schools, in Adams County, in Brighton, in Denver, in Aurora, who can meet that gap. And that's exactly what Representative Fields and the Fields Foundation have done. We've now graduated 100 students through an 8 and 14-week program. When they graduate, they're certified in CPR, first aid, bloodborne pathogens, leadership. We teach them how to build wealth in partnership with the Young American Bank and Wells Fargo. And Anschutz comes off campus to sow into these young people's lives, and then in turn, 80% of them are hired. And what are they doing on Anschutz campus now? They're patient transporters. They're working in dietary services. We've given them scholarships to go back to school, continue going back to school. And now Anschutz this summer will start their first CNA program at the campus of the Fields Foundation. And so this can be going on across the state in every single sector. The governor has created something called COIN, sector partnerships, where you identify which industries are growing the strongest. In Arapahoe County, we know that that is healthcare, we know that it's broadband and technology, and we know it's construction. We know that these industries are having difficulty recruiting people of color, and we know that we have difficulty with low income and youth of color who are unemployed. And they want our help. They want us at the table. They don't want to be in the newspaper. And so I want to encourage everyone to think about ways in which we can continue to get people into these workforce pipelines. And workforce pipelines don't begin in the 11th grade. Workforce pipeline programs begin in we ask the babies, baby, what do you want to be when you grow up? And then we have the parents come in and we tell them, it's parent day and we take your kid to work. For me, workforce development began when I was a candy stripe at Fitzsimmons Hospital. I turned around and then went to CU. And now I'm teaching there. So we have to continue to make investments in our kids' lives. And we have to continue to do it by any means necessary.
People of color are not able to enter into workforce pathways that will get them out of poverty. So specifically, they're not able to pass the NCLEX. They're not able to pass the MCAT. They're not able to pass other standardized tests that you must pass in order to get into graduate education, in order to get your PhD. And so we see that when it comes to workforce and it comes to lifting people out of poverty, if they haven't been trained on how to take the test, and that's truly what this is.
That's right.
And in Cherry Creek schools in Douglas County, it might not be working, but one thing that they do well is they train their kids on how to take the test. And when you look at this, when you look at the new study that just came out of the 1202 task force, we spend between an amount of hours between 34 to 72 hours of a total year of kids actually taking tests. But when it comes to preparing them for the test, we'll only spend between 30 to 50 hours. And I can tell you from teaching in higher education that any college instructor will tell you for 1 hour of class, it requires 3 hours of study. So if we want to have our children be successful at taking any test, whether it's in the elementary school years, middle school, high school, graduate education, then guess what? We have to teach them to do what they have to do